I need you to listen closely because what I'm about to say will make your chest tighten. Somewhere in your past is a woman who didn't realize what she had until the silence became permanent. That silence wasn't accidental, it was earned. If that unsettles you, good. Stay with me. Before we go any deeper, take 1 second to protect your future. Subscribe to this channel and like this video because what you're about to hear isn't comfort, it's clarity, and clarity changes lives. I'm speaking to you as a psychologist, but also as a woman who has listened to thousands of private confessions. Men imagine women wake up one day filled with regret, crying dramatically, desperate to return. That fantasy is comforting, but incomplete. Regret doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives quietly, long after you stop checking your phone. When a woman takes a man for granted, it's rarely because he lacked value. It's because his consistency made his presence feel guaranteed. The human brain adapts quickly to safety. Emotional reliability becomes background noise. Effort without boundaries is interpreted as infinite supply, not devotion. And when something feels infinite, urgency disappears. At first, she doesn't miss you. She feels relief, less pressure, less accountability. She tells herself she's finally choosing herself. Her friends reinforce it. Social media applauds it. The ego loves narratives where loss feels like empowerment. But psychology has a delay mechanism. When stimulation drops, reflection rises. The nights get quieter. New attention feels shallow. Comparisons begin unconsciously. She notices how few people listen without trying to impress. How rare it was to feel understood without performing. That's when regret starts forming, not as pain, but as confusion. A subtle question she can't silence. Why did stability feel boring? Why does chaos feel empty? Why does peace only become visible once it's gone? If you've ever wondered whether being taken for granted meant you were weak, understand this. You weren't forgotten. You were miscalculated. And miscalculations always collect interest. And the most important truth is this. Regret matures in silence, not drama. It grows when memory filters out inconvenience and preserves emotional safety. That process takes time, distance, and contrast. By the time regret fully crystallizes, you are no longer available to receive it, because you already outgrew the version of yourself she underestimated. That lesson hurts, but it also frees you to choose differently next time with awareness. Here's the part men are never told, and I want you to sit with this without defending yourself. Women don't regret losing a man when they lose comfort. They regret losing a man when they lose emotional orientation. Those are not the same thing. At first, she replaces you easily. Attention is abundant. Validation is cheap. New conversations spark dopamine. But dopamine fades quickly when it isn't anchored to meaning. Excitement without emotional grounding becomes exhausting. That's when your absence begins to register, not as longing, but as disorientation. You see, when you were present, you unknowingly became her emotional reference point. Your reactions calibrated her self-image. Your consistency regulated her nervous system. Even your disagreements provided structure. When that structure disappears, the mind scrambles to recreate it elsewhere and fails. This is where regret becomes uncomfortable. Not dramatic, not tearful, but unsettling. She starts remembering the way you stayed calm when she was overwhelmed, the way you didn't leave when things weren't flattering, the way you didn't require her to perform happiness to earn safety. Those memories resurface during moments of stress, not loneliness. And here's the painful truth. The men women regret losing are rarely the ones who begged. They're the ones who withdrew with dignity, the ones who stopped explaining, the ones who didn't chase closure. Silence communicates value more effectively than protest ever could. Her ego resists this realization. It tells her you were replaceable. It tells her she upgraded. But the body keeps score. Emotional memory doesn't respond to logic. It responds to felt safety. And safety is irreplaceable once lost. This is also where many men sabotage themselves without knowing it. When you rush to prove your worth after being undervalued, you erase the contrast required for regret to form. Regret needs space. It needs time. It needs your absence to remain uncorrupted by availability. Understand this clearly. Regret is not about missing you. It's about missing how she felt when she was with you and realizing no one else evokes that state without demanding something in return. By the time this realization surfaces, weeks or months have passed. She's not reaching out yet. She's watching, quietly, measuring, wondering if you've changed, or worse, if you've moved on emotionally. And that's when power shifts. Not because you manipulated anything, but because you finally stopped trying to be understood by someone who only learns through loss. The most haunting regrets are born when replacement fails, and the original source of stability refuses to reappear on command. Now I want you to understand what happens internally when regret deepens, because this is where the emotional weight truly sets in. Regret doesn't arrive as love. It arrives as a quiet dismantling of certainty. The story she told herself about you begins to crack. She remembers how she minimized your efforts, how she delayed affection, how she assumed you would always be there, absorbing emotional labor without complaint. At the time, it felt justified. Now it feels unsettling, not because she suddenly sees you as perfect, but because she sees herself clearly. This is the moment most women never admit publicly. Regret is intertwined with shame. Not dramatic shame, but an internal discomfort that resurfaces during moments of honesty. She realizes she benefited from your patience without reciprocating it. That realization threatens her self-image as a good, emotionally aware person. And here's the psychological conflict. Reaching out would mean acknowledging she misjudged you. Staying silent preserves pride, but intensifies regret. This tension creates emotional rumination. You replay in her mind not because she wants you back, but because the unresolved imbalance disturbs her sense of fairness. She starts checking patterns, comparing new partners to you in ways she never did consciously, noticing how quickly others withdraw, how conditional their kindness feels, how transactional attention becomes. The absence of your steadiness is now felt as stress, not freedom. This is also where many men misunderstand female regret. It's not fueled by loneliness. It's fueled by recognition. Recognition that emotional maturity was present and overlooked. Recognition that safety was misinterpreted as stagnation. Recognition that growth doesn't always feel exciting in the moment. And the hardest truth is this: the regret intensifies when she senses you've changed. Not externally, but energetically. You no longer seek validation. You no longer hover emotionally. That detachment signals evolution, and evolution triggers loss aversion. The mind fixates on what can no longer be accessed easily. She wonders if she could have met you differently, if timing was the issue, if her emotional state blinded her. These questions don't seek answers, they seek relief. But relief doesn't come from hypothetical rewrites. It comes from accountability, and accountability is painful, so she sits with it, quietly, letting memory sharpen, letting comparison deepen, letting the realization settle that some men aren't meant to be lessons. They were meant to be partners, and that opportunity expired not because you failed, but because she didn't recognize value until absence forced clarity. And that kind of regret doesn't fade quickly. It becomes a reference point for every future connection, a silent benchmark that reminds her what emotional safety actually felt like, long after you've stopped wondering whether she ever noticed. Here is where regret turns from a private discomfort into a lasting psychological imprint. Once a woman realizes she misjudged a man's value, the mind doesn't simply move on, it reframes history. Every future relationship is now filtered through the absence you left behind. She notices how often she has to explain herself now, how often she feels misunderstood, how often she has to negotiate for basic emotional consideration. These moments don't make her miss you romantically at first. They make her tired, and fatigue is a powerful trigger for reflection. This is when she remembers how easy it was with you. Not effortless in a lazy way, but emotionally efficient. You didn't drain her, you didn't confuse her, you didn't destabilize her sense of self. That realization is sobering because it contradicts the excitement she once prioritized. Psychologically, the brain values what lowers cognitive load. Emotional safety reduces stress hormones. When that stabilizing presence disappears, the nervous system searches for it. When it can't be replicated, regret deepens into longing, not for you specifically, but for the state of calm she once took for granted. And here's something few men realize. Regret becomes strongest when she sees you thriving without bitterness, not flaunting success, not proving a point, simply grounded, peaceful. That signals that your value wasn't dependent on her recognition. It existed independently. This is confronting because it forces her to accept that the loss wasn't mutual. You didn't lose the same thing she did. You lost someone who underestimated you. She lost someone who offered stability without conditions. Those losses are not equal. At this stage, reaching out becomes tempting, not always to reconcile, but to relieve internal tension, to test whether the door is still open, to see if she still has access to the version of you that once felt guaranteed. But here's the paradox. The very growth that makes you attractive again is the reason reconciliation rarely works. You're no longer willing to overextend. You no longer tolerate emotional imbalance. And she senses that immediately. Regret doesn't mean readiness. Awareness doesn't equal transformation. Many women regret the man they took for granted without becoming the woman who could keep him. So the regret stays internal. It becomes quieter, heavier, more personal. A lesson etched into emotional memory, not as pain, but as understanding. Understanding that some connections are rare, and once mishandled, they don't return in the same form. And that realization follows her into every future relationship, into every moment of emotional comparison. Because once you've lost a man who offered calm, consistency, and depth, excitement alone never feels like enough again. Now listen carefully, because this is where the story quietly flips in your favor, even if you never see it happen. Regret doesn't always lead to action. Often, it leads to restraint. And restraint is where its true weight lives. By this point, she understands something deeply uncomfortable. Contacting you might reopen a door, but it would also expose her to rejection, or worse, indifference. The possibility that you no longer need her validation is terrifying. So she waits, she watches, she rationalizes silence as maturity while feeling the pull of unfinished emotional business. This is not about pride alone. It's about identity protection. Admitting she took you for granted would require her to revise how she sees herself in relationships. That kind of internal shift is harder than walking away ever was. And here's the quiet irony. While she's processing regret internally, you're integrating the lesson externally. You're learning boundaries, you're learning discernment, you're learning that consistency without reciprocity erodes self-respect. That growth didn't come from being valued, it came from being overlooked. She may never say your name out loud, but when she hesitates before dismissing a good man in the future, that pause belongs to you. When she recognizes emotional safety earlier next time, that awareness was earned through losing you. This is why regret doesn't always look like reaching out. Sometimes it looks like changed behavior with someone else. And that realization stings, because it means the growth you inspired benefits another man. But understand this, that growth was never yours to wait for. The most psychologically grounded men don't measure their worth by who regrets them. They measure it by who recognizes them in real time. Regret is not validation. It's evidence that your value required distance to be understood. And if she does reach out one day, it won't be with clarity. It will be cautious, indirect, testing the emotional temperature. Not because she doesn't care, but because she knows she no longer holds leverage. What you do then matters less than who you've become by that point. If you've grown, you won't rush to fill old roles. You won't audition for appreciation. You'll listen, observe, and decide based on alignment, not nostalgia. That's the real transformation. Not her regret, but your recalibration. You stop needing to be chosen by those who only recognize value after loss. You start choosing environments where effort is mirrored, not consumed. And that shift is permanent. Because once you understand that being taken for granted was never about your worth, you stop offering unlimited access to people who haven't earned it. Regret may follow you quietly, but you no longer live in its shadow. This is where everything settles, and I want you to hear this not as theory, but as a closing truth. The deepest regret a woman feels isn't that she lost you. It's that she lost access to who she was when she felt safe, seen, and steady. That version of herself existed in proximity to you, and once you're gone, so is that emotional mirror. Over time, the intensity of regret changes shape. It stops aching and starts teaching. It becomes a quiet reference point, a standard she didn't know she was setting when she dismissed you. Every healthy interaction she experiences later will be measured against the absence you left behind, not consciously, nervously, emotionally. And here's what most men never realize. You don't need her regret to complete your story. Regret is a byproduct, not a destination. It happens when someone realizes too late that they confused peace with boredom and stability with stagnation. That misinterpretation is common, but its consequences are permanent. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you should have done more, loved harder, stayed longer, let me be clear as a psychologist. Overgiving doesn't create appreciation. It delays awareness. Value is recognized when access is limited, not when it's endless. The man who is taken for granted becomes the man who is remembered. The man who stays too long becomes the man who is forgotten. Leaving when you are undervalued is not abandonment. It's emotional self-respect. And if she ever thinks of you years from now, it won't be with regret alone. It will be with understanding. Understanding that you offered something rare without making her earn it, and that rarity can't be replicated on demand. But by then, you will have moved on internally. You'll choose partners who meet consistency with consistency, who don't need loss to trigger insight, who don't confuse calm with lack of passion. That's the final shift. You stop being a lesson for someone else and start being a foundation for someone aligned. So if you've been questioning your worth because you were taken for granted, release that weight. You weren't overlooked because you lacked value. You were overlooked because your value was steady, quiet, and misunderstood. And those are the men women don't forget. Not because of drama, not because of pain, but because emotional safety once lost leaves an echo that never fully fades. Carry this forward. Not with bitterness, with clarity, because the man who understands this truth doesn't chase regret. He builds a life where appreciation is present, mutual, and unmistakable.